आने वाले कल की दस्तक हमें सुनाई देती है। नई मंजिल है जिस ओर हमें वो दिशा दिखाई देती है। नए इंडिया का नया जोश, नए इंडिया का नया जोश, नए जोश से निकल पड़े हम, आने वाला कल होगा हमारा। नए इंडिया का नया जोश।
और नए इंडिया के सफर में टेक्नोलॉजी की शक्ति लेकर आपका भागीदार रहेगा रिलायंस। नए इंडिया का नया जोश।
आने वाले कल की दस्तक हमें सुनाई देती है। नई मंजिल है जिस ओर हमें वो दिशा दिखाई देती है। नए इंडिया का नया जोश, नए इंडिया का नया जोश, नए जोश से निकल पड़े हम, आने वाला कल होगा हमारा। नए इंडिया का नया जोश।
और नए इंडिया के सफर में टेक्नोलॉजी की शक्ति लेकर आपका भागीदार रहेगा रिलायंस। नए इंडिया का नया जोश।
Good afternoon, Mr. Mukundan.
Good afternoon. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Very good. Thank you
And
so much.
we'll
We got
start
about
in another 2-3 minutes.
2 3 minutes. Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
watching the clock
I'll
here.
invite you. Yeah.
We have in all 7 panelists. Has everyone joined, Renuka?
You're on mute, Renuka, you're on mute.
Sorry. There's just one more person. I think they're working on it. I'll just get back to you on that.
So as long as we have first 3 speakers, we are good to go.
Yeah, I think that we can do. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's 4:14. I think we can get started. Amitabh, we can start?
Hi, I think, wait for a minute, I'll just reconfirm. One second.
Okay.
Arunava has joined already. I have not seen him here.
I think he's the one who's missing.
Am I audible?
Yes,
right.
please. Yes,
Yeah.
please.
Hello, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Edwin.
Good afternoon.
Yes, you're audible and your video is very clear.
Am I audible as well?
Yes.
Very,
right.
very, yes.
Excellent.
Okay, I think we are ready to move now.
Yeah. I think we can begin. Yeah,
Yeah.
sure.
So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to the session on building resilient economies for a sustainable future at the Indo-Pacific Business Summit. This summit is being organized by the Economic Diplomacy Division of the Ministry of External Affairs and the Confederation of Indian Industry. To begin with this session, I'd like to invite Mr. R. Mukundan, Managing Director and CEO, Tata Chemicals Limited, India, to give his welcome remarks, set the context, and take the session forward. Over to you, Mr. Mukundan.
Thank you, Renuka. And I just want to firstly welcome all the participants and panelists, more importantly, who are here with us for this important session. Sustainability and sustainable future is something which is very dear to the way we define in CII, the way we define within India, these sustainable communities as something which we need to build for the planet going forward. While I'll make some opening remarks, I just wanted to say that we've got a very rich panel here to get views from. What I would suggest is each of the panelists maybe speak for 5 to 7 minutes, cover their key points, and then at the end, we will probably take 1 or 2 questions through the chat box, preferably. Uh, so what I will do, I will introduce each speaker at the point they come on, so that I don't run through all the introductions and then we then lose, so that the speaker's background is very clear when they are coming on stream. Firstly, let me also thank all the speakers for joining us today. Just as a brief context, I think one of the big issues which we have seen is that there are lots of shocks which communities face: economic and non-economic, financial, natural disasters, pandemic, and these shocks come from time to time. And resilience is the key answer to withstanding these shocks. And these shocks leave a trail of output, income losses, rising inequalities, environmental disasters, and impacts can be very, very devastating, especially on the large bottom of the pyramid. If you look at the more recent event, which is COVID-19, this has been unlike others. It's not been concentrated in one area, it has been around the world, and it's been felt by everyone. It's impacted all cultures, all races, and it's simply demonstrated to us again, once again, in a very clear term, the importance of resilience and building sustainability in our whole frame of development. Uh, if you look at this pandemic itself, there is a direct link between natural world and healthcare outcomes, highlighting the role of protecting and restoring nature and preventing future pandemics. The current pandemic has brought about realization that all systems, however small or large, are interconnected, and a small change in one can have disastrous impact on the other. We are still debating what were the origins of this pandemic, and we have all sorts of links, but scientific community is still on the pathway to understand better how these sort of things have happened in reality. Fundamentally, I think as we recover from this pandemic, we need to look at principles of climate protection, nature protection, tackling inequality, and sustainability takes a center stage as never experienced before. Even before this outbreak, the world was on the cliff of a sustainability crisis. Extreme weather events were very common. We had higher vulnerability, poverty, and hunger challenges were there all through. And this pandemic has aggravated the whole situation even more starkly. This crisis is a devastating reminder that we cannot continue development along the same trajectory. So we will hear different perspectives from around the world on thoughts on how we should look differently going forward. It is also clear that there is a need to reset towards inclusive pathways for recovery to build back better based on shared values of protecting the planet. And that should include critical role for industry in promoting green jobs and livelihoods, and also investments which look at green energy. Change is needed in economic paradigm and thought process, and we have to put long term over short term. And in fact, there is a need to sort of have a process by which we decentralize, empower, facilitate partners and businesses, NGOs, and various organizations. Uh, Coming from our experience in India, we've had new schemes and missions which have been floated at aiming self-reliance, focusing on human-centered aspects as employment generation, livelihood, as also reviving and restoring much-needed economic growth. There are a lot of economic stimulus packages have been announced, and these are all directed at creating jobs and at the bottom of the pyramid, and also to push and kickstart the economy. However, as we look at the whole paradigm for a growing economy with aspiration as such as India, which occupies a very critical space in Indo-Pacific, it is important that we all realize that it's important to be sustainable and self-reliant. But at the same time, to be very competitive and be agile and innovative in responding to external shocks and to be future ready. And businesses have a key role to play in building this better. So COVID-19 is a crisis like no other. It has opened up opportunities like no other. The contours of bright futures are visible in the whole world coming together to address the pandemic. A platform like this is an example of the world coming together to think about how do we build more resilient, sustainable world. And I would say let us seize the opportunity and transform fully to an inclusive, green, and resilient world. With these opening remarks, we all eagerly look forward to our speakers who will present different perspectives and in the world as they see it. At this point, it's my pleasure to welcome Her Excellency Mariana Pacheco Montes, the Ambassador Designate of Colombia to Republic of India. Uh, um, just a brief background. More recently, she served as a Deputy Chief of Mission of Colombian Embassy in Washington, D.C., worked 4 years as Corporate Regulatory Affairs at Postbon in Colombia's largest beverage company, a company of Organization Ardelia. Before joining uh, Postbon, served as Manager of Government Affairs in Philip Morris International, And from 2009 until 2011, worked as consultant in Organization of American States, Secretary General as a consultant in assisting Colombia's most vulnerable population in support of Plan of Colombia's territorial consolidation and economic and social development. Very rich experience and a width of efforts in terms of looking at sustainability, looking at resilience, looking at economic progress. We are all eager to hear from you, Her Excellency. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I hope you're hearing me well. Thanks. Good afternoon to all. Mr. Mukunda, thank you for your kind introduction, and for all, good afternoon. I would like to express my appreciation to the Ministry of External Affairs and to CII for organizing this summit. As His Excellency Jai Shankar highlighted yesterday at the opening of the summit, the Indo-Pacific reflects the reality of globalization and the emergence of multipolarity. As such, the Indo-Pacific region will play a definite role as we work together and look for solutions to achieve an environmental resilient growth to come out of this pandemic. We consider ourselves a special member of the Indo-Pacific family, as Colombia is the only country in South America and one of the 21 countries in the world that has access to both the Pacific and the Atlantic Oceans. Colombia is now leading integration initiatives in the region as pro-temporary president of the Pacific Alliance, an integration scheme which comprises Chile, Mexico, and Peru. Together, the four countries represent the 8th economic power and the 8th export force worldwide. Over the last 3 years, the government of Colombia has introduced many reforms to achieve environmentally resilient economic growth and protect its environmental resources. President Iván Duque has led a comprehensive environmental protection policy in compliance with the principle of producing in conserving and conserving in producing, producir conservando y conservar produciendo. This policy considers sustainable and resilient development, the conservation of our biodiversity, and the participation of the people and communities in environmental issues. One of our most significant goals is the national policy for the zero control of deforestation, with the purpose to achieving zero deforestation by 2030. With this goal, we will not only achieve the conservation and sustainable use of our forest, but also the reduction of our greenhouse gas emissions. As more than 50% of Colombian territory is covered by forests, containing deforestation is a strategic concern for us. Colombia has set a goal of planting 180 million native trees throughout the national territory. To date, 16 million has been planted, contributing to the restoration, conservation, and recovery of important ecosystems throughout the country. Another goal for us is to achieve the limitation and protection of 100% of páramos. Páramos or moors are high elevation water producing factories. They're rare, and Colombia has half of the páramos in the world, which provide water for nearly half of Colombia's population of 50 million. Protecting them is obviously critical, including the largest páramo in the world, the Sumapaz, in the heart of my country. Dear colleagues, let me emphasize the business side of the equation. The COVID-19 pandemic has caused severe social and economic damage across the world, setting back development goals obtained over decades of hard work. Last year alone, Colombia experienced a 6.8% contraction in its GDP. However, we're working to come back to the track of economic dynamism and expect it to grow by 6.5% by the end of 2021. As we navigate our way out of this unprecedented shock, the policy choices we make now should be green, just, and sustainable in order to build long-term resilience and reduce the severity of future shocks. Therefore, Colombia has been working on an ambitious economic reactivation plan aimed at achieving environmental resilient economic growth based on three pillars: carbon neutrality, energy transition, and sustainable mobility and cooling systems, which will require international investment and expertise in a wide array of areas. Let me talk about carbon neutrality. When it comes to carbon neutrality, we have to set up the goal of reducing greenhouse emissions by 51% and building a dynamic market that involves both a voluntary and regulatory contribution by the end of 2021. As we update our policy of national determined contributions, carbon markets arise as an opportunity for international investors in Colombia. Regionally, countries such as Chile, Mexico, and Colombia are the only ones that have already implemented price fixing mechanisms such as cap and trade, but Colombia is the only country that has created an offsetting mechanism that goes along with taxes, and further, we're creating a transactional platform for trading carbon credits. As a result of our efforts since 2017, we have been able to reduce 36 million tons of greenhouse emissions through the overall set of policies. Sustainable mobility and cooling systems. We have also implemented a number of reforms to promote sustainable mobility aimed at reaching 606,000 electric vehicles in 2022, almost 4 times the number in 2018, and a medium-term objective to reach 600,000 electric vehicles in 2030. This reform has created room for foreign capital in a promising market as Colombia led the sales of electric vehicles in Latin America in 2019. In 2020, sales of electrical vehicles and hybrid cars increased by more than 90% despite the pandemic. In the field of cooling system, reforms introduced provide ample space for companies to participate in the manufacturing of 7 million units of energy efficient and HFC-free refrigerators. These units are required to meet the target of reducing greenhouse emissions as Colombia replaces 300,000 pieces of equipment and friendly with the environment. Energy transition. Energy transition also plays an important role in Colombia's plan. Indeed, the UN chose Colombia as one of the 7 countries to lead the global dialogue on energy transition at the high-level dialogue on energy, which will be held at the UN General Assembly this September. In 2020 Energy Transition Index of the World Economic Forum, Colombia singled out as the country with the greatest advance in renewable energy in Latin America. Our government has introduced ambitious reforms, which include the massification variable of renewable energy with the incorporation of solar farms, wind projects, biomass, and small hydro projects, introduction of new technologies such as green hydrogen and geothermal, and the adoption of carbon neutral policy for the sector. These reforms also provide many opportunities for medium and long term for international players. As Colombia moves ahead to increase unconventional renewable sources of energy to 14% of its energy matrix, the government is promoting 14 solar and wind projects to meet its goals. In the near future, there will be more than 8,900 megawatts in non-conventional source developments. Colombia's next renewable energy auction will be held no later than October 31st, 2021, to allocate 5 gigawatts of renewable energy of capacity. Finally, let me invite you to explore further the role that governments and stakeholders from India and the Indo-Pacific region may play in finding sustainable and innovative solutions for the recuperation of the economy and the long-term sustainable growth of Colombia. Colombia has successfully sustainable and resilient recovery, and we want you to be part of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I think a very important point which you brought about is the fact about protecting forests is a key pillar even as we move forward, and that commitment which Colombia is showing in that direction in terms of having a policy and zero deforestation. Water resources, you highlighted the need for building back better through green, just and sustainable future. You also highlighted the three pillars, which is carbon neutrality, energy transition, and sustainable mobility, and the opportunities for business as these investments happen in these spaces. Thank you for your wonderful opening remarks, and also leadership, which you mentioned that Colombia is showing in South America. At this point, I have the pleasure of welcoming Dr. Rene von Berkel, who is the representative of UNIDO in India. He was the UNIDO unit chief of clean and sustainable production, and was responsible for UNIDO's contribution to global resource efficient and cleaner production, RCEP program, which is operational in some 50 emerging and developing countries. He is an environmental scientist by education and holds master's and doctoral degrees in these areas from University of Amsterdam in Netherlands. Over to you, Rene.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's indeed a pleasure to contribute to this session. So thank you to CII and the Ministry of External Affairs for inviting UNIDO to be part of it. UNIDO is the UN Industrial Development Organization. So our mandate is essentially to work with countries on inclusive and sustainable industrial development. So fostering economic prosperities, environmental sustainability, and social inclusion. Or as I put it sometimes easier, in simpler language, we are trying to assist with factories that are fit for the future, because they have addressed the challenges of the past. So being competitive in international markets and having a quality product that's sought after in the market, but also meeting and exceeding environmental standards and providing decent conditions of work and dealing with the communities. This, of course, is part of the global agenda of the United Nations to support countries with the Sustainable Development Goals. Inclusive and sustainable industrial development is SDG 9 of industry, innovation, and infrastructure. But of course, we are looking at a broader picture of all the business contributions to the Sustainable Development Goals. As you might be aware, at the same time that we speak, also in New York, or from New York, I must say, everything is virtual nowadays. The meeting is held of the high-level political forum to review the status of the Sustainable Development Goals. And just yesterday, the report was published, and which sort of highlights the challenges that we have, that we were not yet on track a year ago or 2 years ago, and the COVID pandemic has put us quite significantly back. We are witnessing a first time in many decades that we see an increase of people living in absolute poverty, for example, but also on other indicators we see regression having happened. And ultimately we are in what the UN refers to as the decade of action for the Sustainable Development Goals, with 10 years to go to 2030. If I just speak in India, we have, of course, a very strong focus on the micro, small, and medium-sized sector component. Micro, small enterprises are in India a large sector of the economy, but they are also globally that. And UNIDO is, of course, replicating similar approaches elsewhere. We've seen that very much the MSME sector, the smaller businesses, have been particularly affected by the crisis, or by the pandemic. So UNIDO did with some of our partners kind of a snap survey during April, May in India, and of course that was really the peak of the second wave of the pandemic in India. And then we find that if I take the rough figures, about 1 in 3 firms are actually saying that the sales declined by 50% or more, and 1 in 3 firms also report that they have lost half of their sales. So it's not just that the small parts have been dented; a significant economic downgrade has been happening. So there's we should also see that there's a marked sectoral differences. So across the board, services sectors appear more severely impacted. Manufacturing, particularly in hospitality, retail, travel, and related sectors. And within manufacturing, there's a split between what we would globally see as the vulnerable industries that have been more adversely impacted, such as beverages, garments, footwear, furniture, and equipment, and the more resilient industries that at a global level have been less impacted, particularly food, pharma, chemicals, plastics, and also automotive. among small manufacturers, it was, for instance, found that the sales in decline for vulnerable industries was about 75% higher than in resilient industries, and profit declines about 30% larger for vulnerable industries compared to resilient industries. Many companies have laid off staff, and what is an unfortunate coincidence that we see, it seems to have had a profound gender dimension in the layoffs. And so among all categories of responding firms, the share of females among those laid off was higher than the share of females in their total workforce, which indicates that women employed by these firms had more likely been laid off. Of course, we are looking also at the opportunities or the recovery pathway. And in that regard, we've certainly seen that there's been a lot of focus on the financial dimension, on the supporting and recovery of working capital and financial flows. However, we also found over the last 15 months in our work in South Asia, I would say, not just India, that just finance is only part of the solution, that there are inherent factors which certainly MSME segment has to address to recover. We see issues, and that the current situation is very unpredictable, that markets have changed. We've seen changes in the workforce, and we also see the need for changes in the workplace, because how can we work together in a safe and hygienic manner? We cannot continue as we did in the past. We've also seen the issues of basically stranded asset and stranded inventories because of the standstill, and we also, of course, have seen the disrupted supply chains. So UNIDO has been working very much on trying to assist the smaller manufacturers on recovery. So we've done what is known as Building Back Business from Crisis, B3C, MSME.org, a kind of an online resource encouraging manufacturers to not just start where they left off before the pandemic, but to really think through what makes most sense to do first again. So an element of planning, then preparedness of adjusting your workplace procedures and starting again, and then growing based on basically core competencies and looking also at business continuity. And we should also address and understand that that's very much linked to the sustainability aspects, that the crisis is also at the same time an opportunity to look at some other areas in businesses. So we see weaknesses in certain sectors related to financing, entrepreneurial capabilities, their supply chains, their energy and environment issues. So this is also the time to say, okay, if we cannot grow because the economy is stagnating, how can we improve our operations, our efficiency? So this is the right time. Or I can put it the other way around. If in the past you could afford to be wasteful with energy and still be profitable, that is no longer possible. So there's a strong incentive to look at the resource efficiency in the workplaces, productivity issues. I think so. These are more the issues which are at the shorter term, and I think moving forward we will see also transformative change. So there is no way of going back to before COVID. So as much as we might aspire, this is just not feasible anymore. I think in the short term we'll see much more of a focus on health and hygiene, which will be there, and which will be certainly in certain jurisdictions will be playing out more profound than in other jurisdictions. But we just have to address, and we will see a push for more WASH-related initiatives. Also, I think as a spin-off, more attention for occupational health and safety, which will be there. And then one might see that in the international supply chains also as a call for greater social responsibility and voluntary sustainability standards. However, I think that in addition to these health-related changes or health-induced, there will be also other changes. I think moving forward, we see a change happening along three main drivers. I think first of all, there is one which deals with the resilience of the supply chain or resilience of value chain. So we saw that the impacts of the pandemic and the lockdowns were aggravated by the fact that we're so interconnected and that companies have seen to create, again, redundancies in supply chains, multiple sources, so that you're more flexible and more resilient in changes. But we think so that has resulted in some of reshoring or different sourcing of products and supply chains. But ultimately, that might also lead to other changes, because we had also seen quite a distinct or differentiation between product development and innovation, and on the other hand, manufacturing and delivery of products and services. And that might also come back again, because the companies which have done well in terms of being responsive is moving into repurposing and do PPAs or start making ventilators and so on, where those who had at the same place manufacturing capability and innovation capability. So resilience will be reshoring, but will also be integration of manufacturing and innovation, product development. I think the second big change will be around digital. We have seen, of course, the digitalization taking place on e-commerce. So the only way to proceed was going e-commerce, but we'll see that also extended into other areas and more the area of advanced digital manufacturing, digital production, so Industry 4.0. So we see accelerated transformations there, which will also help to address the issues of or reorganizing the workplaces to make it feasible to work again. And then the third one, and maybe that's most relevant to this panel, I think that also it will be the environment dimension. So that will also change. I catch that then around the buzzword of circularity, but I basically think that circularity is then not just about closing material cycles, but also slowing them down by resource efficiency and looking at renewables. But we will certainly see that as that the pandemic has shown the interlinkages between natural disasters and health disasters. We've also seen that a positive change that people are certainly here in South Asia with the lockdown. They saw air quality improving. They saw for the first time clean air. They have the young generation has more of a sense of can do. And if I may be very brutal, I think also that companies have realized that the impacts of the pandemic have been quite disruptive on business. And if you now go forward and think what climate change could do, it might be much bigger. So even the pessimists or the unbelievers, the disbelievers have gotten a kind of a, if I may call it that way, wake-up call that this is all serious and that will happen. So I will also see some positive momentum for resource efficiency, circularity, climate action, and I think we can be quite inclusive on this. We don't have to single out, or we have to do first energy efficiency or first renewables. It is really really important to do that. So I think I will stop here. I think a lot is needed in terms from the business sector to be prepared to think outside of the box and to really drive also a little bit the point of excellence in what we do, because excellence means that we prepare for the future. We have some foresight. I'm not saying that we could have foreseen and be in a completely, this was out of the radar, but certainly we would have been in a better place with greater capabilities around excellence, innovation, and sustainability thinking. So I'll leave it there for this first introduction. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Rennie. I think one of the things you brought out clearly has been this whole focus on MSME. And our own view in CII has been that we have to protect the entire ecosystem. We just can't protect few companies. If you don't protect the ecosystem, economy is not going to start. And I think one of the points which you brought out clearly has been one of our key focus areas. This the loss of jobs has been more has impacted the different genders differently. In fact, the women have been more impacted more sharply in this downturn which we've seen, and I think that's clearly something you have brought out and a point for all of us to consider. And the transformation, your view is it's not just health and hygiene and EHS. When we build back, three elements you are highlighting, which are sharply in front of us, which is resilience, and second one being digital, and lastly, your whole issue of circularity and sustainability. And the focus, I think this should help make all organizations focus on adaptation and mitigation as part of their planning and planning forward. I think all key points which we have to keep in mind when we look at sustainable pathway for the for our future as we build back resilient economies. Thank you so much for those remarks and the points and areas of focus. At this point, I'd like to invite Dr. Donald Cannon. He is the European Investment Bank's regional head in South Asia, covering India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, Nepal, Bhutan, and Maldives. He's responsible for EIB's engagement with public and private sector on climate action and sustainable finance. One of the key elements which has already been spoken by our previous two speakers, access to finance is going to be the key. And he has had a very strong interest in terms of broad outcomes of the work as an agent of organizational change, improving development and environment sustainability in financing projects wherever he's been involved. Over to you, Dr. Donald Cannon. You're on mute. You've got to unmute yourself. We can't hear you.
Still can't hear you.
So what we will do, we'll go to Mr. Edwin as we wait for Donald to come back. I think we'll fix the network. Let me just introduce our fourth speaker, which is Mr. Edwin Koikoik, who is the Counselor on Energy and Climate Action in the European Union delegation to India. He's responsible for cooperation between EU and India in the areas of energy and climate action, including implementation of EU-India Clean Energy and Climate Partnership. He has worked for many years in Netherlands Ministry of Environment, in Dutch delegation to UNFCCC, UN Aviation Organization, UN Maritime Organization, and has been a policy advisor on air quality amongst several other things. He's also worked in the cabinet of the president and advising him inter alia on energy, climate change issues. Over to you, Edwin. Sorry to pull you forward. I'm sure we'll fix the problem soon. Thanks for stepping in.
Okay, thank you very much. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are. You're very much audible.
Okay. Okay, so thank you, Mr. Mukundan, and thanks also from my side to CII and to the Ministry of External Affairs for having me in this important event. As we all know, governments around the world will spend over 10 trillion euro to recover in the wake of COVID. And in the EU, we strongly believe that we need to use this investment, as everybody is saying, to build back better and to invest in an economy fit for the 21st century, an economy that is green, digital, and resilient. We believe that the policies we put in place now must set our infrastructure, our agriculture, our industries, and our investment flows on the right pathway. When we look at the cost of non-action, it becomes clear we cannot afford not to invest in the green transition. From the EU side, our actions are guided by the EU recovery package and the European Green Deal. The recovery package, which is called Next Generation EU, is our growth strategy to recover from the pandemic and to overcome the challenges of climate change and environmental degradation, and to transform towards a more modern, resource-efficient and competitive economy. So this is very important. We consider this not as only environmental policy or recovery policy. We really think this is growth policy. We think it is in our interest to do so. So the European Green Deal, together with the digital transformation agenda, are at the core of this recovery package. We want to move to a climate neutral European continent by 2050 and to a clean circular economy, restoring biodiversity and cutting pollution, while ensuring, and that's also very important, while ensuring that nobody is left behind. So the European Green Deal has the following aims. It wants to supply a clean, affordable, and secure energy supply. It wants to ramp up the production and the deployment of sustainable alternative transports. It wants to decarbonize our heavy industries such as steel, cement, and basic chemicals, and strive towards a circular economy. It wants to work in particular with Europe's most carbon-intensive regions to ensure a just transition for all. It wants to launch a renovation wave to make existing homes and buildings energy efficient. And actually, this is a very important part, I think, of both the European and also the Indian energy demand. Also in Indian buildings play an extremely important role, and striving towards more energy efficient buildings creates a lot of jobs and potential economic growth. In Europe, we will focus more on renovation of our buildings. Here it will be more about new buildings. Then also it's very important to adapt to the unavoidable consequences of climate change. We want to bring sustainability from farm to fork. So it means the European Green Deal looks at our agriculture. It wants to better protect nature with 30% of land and sea in protected areas in Europe, and to plant 3 billion trees by 2030. And it wants to involve citizens and social society through a climate pact. So this is a whole list of activities under the European Green Deal that, as we believe, contribute to dealing with the key challenges that we are facing now, the global challenges, but it also contributes to our growth and to strengthening our competitivity. So to be able to have a climate neutral Europe by 2050, we increased our 2030 target for greenhouse gas emission reduction from 40% to at least 55% compared to 1990. And these objectives for 2050 and 2030 are laid down in a new EU climate law that actually has been adopted by the European Parliament and the Council of the European Union last week. And why am I telling this? Because we believe that it's important to give European citizens and businesses the legal certainty and predictability they need to plan for the transition. So now we have put our 2030 targets in law. We have put our 2050 target in law, so it's clear where we are going. And in this law, we also are establishing a process to define a target for 2040. So we try to create as much clarity as possible. Later this month, we will come with the European Commission will come with concrete proposals to make our climate and energy legislation fit for this 2030 target of 55%. Because as I said, our target was 40%, and we had a lot of legislation in place to achieve this 40% by 2030. But now we have increased the ambition, so we need to update all our existing legislation and make it more ambitious. We believe that the transition is on its way and that it's unstoppable, that we need to set the right policies from the government side, also invest, use the public money in the right way. And we are very keen on our agenda on sustainable financing. And there I want to refer to an international initiative that we have, the International Platform on Sustainable Finance, which has been launched in 2020, and in which also India is one of the founding members. And this platform is important because the aim is to try to agree on definitions for sustainable finance. There is an awful lot public and private money available to invest in a green transition, but the investors want to be sure that actually the investments are green. So I believe that's an important element when you talk about green transition. I also mentioned before that we should leave no one behind. Not all people will immediately profit from the transition. We need to ensure that workers in carbon-intensive sectors and areas are retrained, and that the poor do not suffer from climate action. Climate action should not result in energy poverty, and there we are keen on sharing our experiences that we have in Europe. Perhaps just to give some figures. As I said, we believe that by directing the public money in the right pathway, it will also attract more private money, and our next generation EU and also the multi-financial framework, which is the budget for the European Union for the next 7 years, which is a total of 1.8 trillion euros. 30% of this budget, so around 550 billion euros, will have to be spent on climate mainstreaming actions. So this is clear now in the EU, almost 1/3 of the EU budget will be spent on climate mainstreaming actions, which is very important for our companies. They know that there is a market out there. Then also we have created the Recovery and Resilience Facility, and 37% of this total recovery package, which is 672 billion euros, 37% of that needs to be climate-related investments. So in other words, another 249 billion will be available for climate-related investments. Perhaps the last message that I would have, two last messages. One last is that mitigation is key. So I've been focusing on mitigation now a lot, but we realize that we also need to embrace climate change adaptation and resilience as key drivers for a more sustainable environment and economy. So in the EU, we have adopted an EU adaptation strategy, which focuses a lot on better planning also in the EU member states. And we believe that focusing on both reducing the emissions, increasing economic growth, increasing resilience to climate change, that all this needs to come together. Then my last message is that I've been now probably far too much focusing on the EU, but I think it's useful to sort of share our line of thinking. In all these areas, we are very keen on cooperation with the government of India. I myself, I'm responsible for the cooperation in the area of energy and climate change. And we have a very rich cooperation with the energy ministries and the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change on the clean energy transition, energy efficiency, renewable energy, smart grids, and also on financing. So we try to set up a new platform in which we try to mobilize more investments from Europe to India and the other way around in the area of the clean energy transition. We try to identify the barriers and come up with possible solutions. This is a new initiative, but we think it's key to ensure that the investments are flowing in the right direction, in the direction of a cleaner and greener future. Back over to you, Mr. Mukundan.
Thank you very much. And I think we couldn't agree with you more in terms of focusing both on adaptation and mitigation. I think that's also been the focus of government here. And I think what you have highlighted is one of the ways we can make the commitment come alive is by putting that into some legal framework in terms of laws, as well as making sure there's budgetary support. I think these are very important points which I did take note of. In addition to your point about sustainable financing, what you highlighted is how much are we spending on skilling and retraining the people so that we could take them along with us. I think very important message and a very important direction, policy direction for all of us to look at. Thank you very much for those inputs and insights. Let me now go back to Dr. Donald Cannon. Can you try to come on, please?
Can you hear
Yes,
me?
we can hear you. Wonderful, wonderful.
Excellent.
Please go on.
Very good. Oh, thank you very much for your patience, everyone. I appreciate that. My apologies for dropping off earlier. And thank you to the Ministry and to CII for this afternoon's session. I hope this is the beginning of what we plan to be a strong and purposeful recovery from what is probably one of the worst public health disasters in any of our lifetimes. And there are some of us who have longer lifetimes. So just a brief word of introduction of the EIB. So we're the long-term financing arm of the European Union. So I'm a partner to Edwin, who you just heard speaking. Edwin provides the legal and policy framework for our work, and we provide the investment. So I guess you could say we're rather like the EU's Asian Development Bank. And so we finance things like the European Union's Green Deal, but also the EU's engagement in India and many other countries around the world. So just coming to today's session on building resilience into economic recovery, I'd like just to focus a little bit on that term resilience, which I think, if you look it up, there are many, many definitions. But for me, it's the ability to withstand shocks and then the ability to recover and carry on as before. And what I'd like to suggest that there are actually two levels of resilience, and it's quite an important distinction. One is a more passive approach to resilience. One is it's simply the ability to weather the shock and then to carry on and move into and support a recovery. I think the second level, and then that's the area that I would hope we would operate in, is the ability to minimize the losses of the shock and then to accelerate into the recovery, to actually drive a recovery more rapidly. And time is a critical element in that. So I think just looking at the first of the element of that, withstanding or weathering the shock and minimizing the losses, I think that's all about preparedness for what I think is now emerging as probably three categories of societal level shocks to the economy. There are probably three. The first and most obvious of those is public health shocks. And that is already wiped off, as we heard from the ambassador of Colombia. That's wiped off a huge chunk of many economies, probably globally around 8 to 10% of the global economy, just on public health. So that's one class of shocks. Second is, as Edwin's describing, is the severe climatic events, which affect wholesale communities or regions, and in particular can affect vital economic centers like Mumbai or governance centers like Delhi. And I think those are very good reasons to take resilience very seriously. And the third, and of course we shouldn't forget, are natural disasters. And we saw a few years ago the earthquake in Nepal, which wiped off 1/3 of their economy outright. And just a few years ago, a volcano in Iceland stopped all air traffic over Europe and America for 2 weeks. So natural disasters have very significant impact. So the key for me as an investor, as a financier, is on preparedness, is to make sure that each investment going forward in infrastructure, each and every investment, whether it's a hospital or a transport system, a sewerage system, whatever it is, it's planned and built and operated in ways that it can effectively operate in a degraded environment, one where people may not be able to access work, where the business processes may not have access to the kind of paper that they had before, and the communications and IT systems can operate remotely. An importantly aspect of that is that these buildings and services actually can do it at a meaningful capacity. So they're not degraded to nothing, but they're degraded hopefully to a meaningful level, but that they can contribute to a network of similarly designed hospital services. And we saw that in COVID, that it's not just one hospital that counts. It's oxygen supplies to all of the hospitals. So I think as an investor, that's something that we do very actively. We now look at all of our investments with that kind of resilience angle on it. But I think we can step back a little bit and look at the recovery phase, and we're seeing some fundamental changes in investment patterns already visible in our recovery from COVID. And I think here India has been a little bit prescient and I don't know, perhaps lucky in its timing with this Self-Reliant India initiative, because supply chains are evolving rapidly, and generally means supply chains are shortening, and that people are, most countries, and in the EU included, are moving to a situation of strategic autonomy. So there is a great deal of investment going on in that side. The second most obvious change, to my mind, is the rapid digitalization of nearly all aspects of the service economy. And so that can be things like education, health, governance of our organizations is deeply affected, and of course, commerce, generally commerce. So those are areas of building that, investing in digitalization builds in resilience, in my view. And a little more generally, building resilience into the recovery phase is about mobilizing and channeling capital. And in India's case, I think that's not just through the banking system, but also using the diversification that's built into the capital markets in India. Now, it's a truism that there is no shortage of capital. Capital flows simply to the strongest projects. And so we have to, going forward, we have to ensure that we are designing projects and implementing strong projects. And that means two things. It means that we work with experienced sponsors of projects and that the projects are very well designed. And I'll give you a good reason for looking at the capital markets and these kind of strong projects. This year, the EIB issued a bond as part of its financing. It's raising finance for our lending purposes. We issue bonds on a regular basis. In January, we raised a sustainability bond for biodiversity, and we raised 1.5 billion euros just for the protection and restoration of biodiversity and ecosystems. So all the money we raised in that bond issue is going towards environmental projects. But even more significant than that is the fact that this issue was oversubscribed 15 times, meaning that we could have raised 20 billion, that's 1/3 of our annual funding needs, on just one topic. Now that means there's a huge demand by investors for sustainable projects with resilience built into them. And just as a few figures to help situate this, last year there were 160 billion euros raised for sustainable projects. Now that's the same size as the whole of the ODA, the Overseas Development Systems, both grant and debt finance worldwide. So sustainable finance is emerging as a very hot topic. Green bonds even separately raised another 290 billion last year. So there are huge pools of money, huge pools of investors looking for good, strong projects in which to invest in. Now, these investors, why are they looking to these projects? Well, they're wanting to diversify their investment portfolios and avoid stranded assets. Organizations who are failing to deal with problems of climate change, organizations who are not resilient to economic shocks and so on. And in fact, some organizations are completely exiting these sectors, and that's driving a huge search for strong, sustainable and resilient projects. And I just want to talk a little bit about the key to unlocking this demand or this finance. And it's perhaps a surprising answer to this. It's about labeling. And labeling is about standardization of the definitions and the evaluation criteria for green and sustainable investments and the projects that are being developed around the world. And I think the analogy that's useful here is, financial statements that are published in India or in Ireland can be read and understood by investors or auditors or regulators anywhere in the world. So that's exactly what the objective of sustainable finance taxonomies and sustainable finance labeling is about. It's providing a reporting mechanism and a basis for decision making for investors. And it's making those decisions can be made in terms of climate and in ESG, environmental, social, and governance risks, and indeed companies' resilience. And the good news is that NITI Aayog is currently working with the UNDP to prepare an Indian national taxonomy for sustainable finance, and I'm honored to be a part of that initiative. And that's actually based on and extending the taxonomies that were developed in the EU and in Singapore and more recently in South Africa. But as Edwin's just said, the Indian Ministry of Finance is also a founder member of the International Platform for Sustainable Finance. So India is already working to ensure that its taxonomy will be harmonized with other taxonomies around the world and can attract international investment. And that India's taxonomy should emerge later this year. So just broadly in conclusion, I think there is an ongoing change in investment patterns. We talked about some of the themes, but I think the most important theme is better project design to ensure that the outcomes of the projects in terms of the resilience, in terms of ESG, in terms of climate, are defined upfront in the project. And then there are mechanisms put in place to monitor and report on these outcomes. And that reporting should be part of a dialogue with investors, with regulators, with stakeholders, and indeed the general public. And I think just one more point in India's particular case, I think building resilience into India's financial system calls for an expansion of India's capital markets. And to that extent, it needs not only the taxonomy, but it needs benchmark issuers, so top quality companies who can aggregate lots of these projects and companies who are capable of committing to resilience and delivering on those resilience committings. And secondly, it needs a whole raft of benchmark issues. So significant volumes of capital raising in the capital markets which allows international and domestic investors to actively trade in and out of the sustainable and green bonds market. So just a few thoughts to stimulate the discussion. I hope that's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Donald. Certainly a very, very important point you brought about in terms of both preparedness and recovery, but more importantly, as you mentioned, the financing and the finance piece it needs a taxonomy, needs a labeling, needs the kind of benchmark issuers and benchmark project sponsors to come forward and come create that ecosystem which is very vibrant. All very important points, and I'm sure that Indian regulators and Indian policymakers are listening very, very closely to this as we build back better, because I think the ecosystem will be benefited if we bring this all together in a very cogent and constructive way. Thank you for those comments and very important remarks. This point, I'd like to invite Ms. Eva Zabe, who is from the Business for Nature, with a background in natural capital, environmental management. Eva is an experienced leader, facilitator, speaker, and has led Business for Nature since 2019. Business for Nature brings together business, conservation organization, and forward-thinking companies to amplify powerful leading business voice calling for government to adapt policies now to reverse nature laws this decade. He spent many years leading multiple projects at the WBCSD, a lot of work in terms of natural, social, human capital measurement, valuation, and towards integrated performance management, ultimately reporting for investors. She has led the development of natural capital protocol as well as establishment of social and human capital coalition, both of which sit under the leadership of Capitals Coalition. Over to you, Eva, for your remarks.
Thank you so much. And thank you for the opportunity to be part of this panel, to learn and exchange with all of you. So yes, I lead Business for Nature, which is this global coalition. It includes partners from around the world, and we're delighted that CII is one of them. We're really seeing this momentum in the business community around the importance of nature and biodiversity loss. And now more than 900 companies, for example, are now calling on governments to adopt policies now to reverse nature loss in this decade. And that includes companies like Tata Steel, Mahindra, and hundreds of others from around the world. So I would encourage all of you who are listening to sign up to the Business for Nature call to action, which is called Nature is Everyone's Business. And India is really of strategic importance for us in terms of the solutions and the scaling up that's necessary. So, you know, as you yourself, Mr. Mukundan, and Ambassador Pacheco and others were referring to, the COVID crisis has just reminded us of how vulnerable we all are and the need to strengthen resilience. And I keep on thinking, I kept on thinking during this session about that powerful quote from Albert Einstein, which is so simple of, we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. And what we're talking about right now is not just incremental change. It's not even just a transition, but it's a real system transformation. And that means we have to fundamentally change the rules in the system that we live in right now, if we actually want to have a chance of acting at the scale and speed that's necessary to address the urgency that we're talking about. And I can think of 3 sets of rules that would significantly accelerate that business action to address these interconnected challenges of nature loss, climate change, and I should add, importantly, of course, inequality. And this builds on what other speakers have just been talking about. But in my mind, there are really 3 that we can focus on. There's the policy rules, finance, and business itself. So if we think about policy, because it sets the regulatory rules in which businesses must operate. And that's where we see the importance of these international agreements. For climate, we've seen the mainstreaming of business action, investment, strategic focused since the Paris Agreement in 2015. It's tangible, we can see it. We now need to drive that same policy ambition for nature at the sister convention on biological diversity, the CBD at COP15, to drive even more business action on nature. And as Mr. Kokok just said, business do need the political certainty to then quickly invest, innovate, and shift business models. Last year, we did a bit of an analysis of, okay, so are companies actually making commitments and taking action to reverse nature loss? The answer is yes. Hundreds around the world, more than 1,200 companies are taking action in different ways. The message there, it's fragmented and it's clearly not enough. So how can we scale and speed that up? You've got to change the regulatory rules. You've also got to change the financial system because it sets the economic rules of the game in which companies exist. But these rules need to be and are currently being rewritten, as we've just heard from you, Mr. Cannon. And these rules, though, are highly influential. We cannot underestimate this. For example, all investors, can't we agree that all investors should just stop investing in activities that have a highly negative impact on the climate and biodiversity? In a way, we sometimes, I think, get over complexified or use terms that people don't understand, but sometimes it helps to just simplify what it is we're aiming for. Investors, for example, should be calling for companies in their portfolios to issue climate and nature-related financial disclosures. And we have that with the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. We're getting there with the new Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, and all of these different systems like, the International Platform for Sustainable Finance, the non-financial disclosures, et cetera, and the taxonomies that bring them all together, and that standardization is crucial. And for any of that to have an actual positive impact on people and planet, because we mustn't forget that is the ultimate point, right? Is the having a positive impact on people and planet. We then need to have those meaningful and credible ESG, environmental social governance data, alongside the traditional financial reporting. And in our sustainability community, we have to be open to this very healthy opening of the hood of what is in that ESG data. We need to make sure that it is auditable, that it's been verified. Would any company disclose their financial reports without making sure that it was super credible, meaningful, and had been verified and audited? No, it seems obvious. We need the same level of rigor so that we get financial grade ESG data that really will inform the best decisions on the ground. And then the third area of rules is, well, the internal business processes themselves, which are the internal management rules, including, for example, risk management processes, procurement policies, budget allocations, pension plans, investments, the list goes on. And these existing processes need to be upgraded massively. It's the full makeover to directly embed nature, climate, and people in the everyday decision-making and disclosure processes. And they need to be based on robust scientific monitoring. And this is where they need to focus more on resilience than on efficiency. And I should say that, companies are really, the reason there's this momentum I'm talking about at the beginning is not just because companies do want to make, leading companies, I should say, want to make sure they're having a positive impact. It's just makes pure business sense. And you may have seen a very important report called the Eco-Awakening that was from the Economist Intelligent Unit with WWF that really gives us some evidence now that yes, consumers are also waking up. People more than ever are in search of a sustainable future. We've seen also the most dramatic growth in engagement and awareness around nature and biodiversity loss in Asia, most notably in India. The number of searches for biodiversity, nature loss in India has gone up 190% since 2016. And people are more, 71% increase globally of searches for sustainable products since 2016. So this is giving the trend. So I'll just end with a few, concluding kind of reflections. Underpinning all of these rules, though, is quite a profound shift in every decision we make as individuals, as companies, as organizations, governments, etc. There's the shift that from focusing on negative impacts to our fundamental dependency on nature and its services. And there's a shift from efficiency to resilience. And let's look at and learn from nature on this. You know, nature provides us with the best examples of how to be resilient. And that means having more diversity that underpins the whole system, biodiversity, which makes sure that our ecosystems are healthy and resilient. And all of our man-made, human-made systems, health, you know, the health system we have in place, the economic system, or even we go back to the financial, it's diversifying portfolios is also a way of making sure you're more resilient. So ultimately, we all rely on this and on nature. And we need to shift, the final shift is we need to shift from focusing on the risks and the costs to then the opportunities. And I just want to raise, for those who might not be aware, last year, the World Economic Forum issued a couple of really key reports around nature. And one was stated that over half of the world's GDP is at moderate or high risk due to nature loss. So that should be ringing alarm bells. But on the other side, and the next report was focusing on the future of business and nature. And that told us that by 2030, there is the opportunity of creating nearly 400 million jobs and $10 trillion of economic value generated in a nature positive world. And so basically, to end with, you know, the coming post-pandemic recovery gives the world a chance now to embrace such reforms, you know, redirect harmful subsidies, for example, and we need to rewire our economic system and reward that sustainable long-term performance that goes way beyond financial goals. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Eva. That was very important that you brought out. It's not just the risk, but also the opportunity. I think, thank you for reminding that we in CI need to do a bit more in terms of biodiversity. We have the India Business Biodiversity Initiative, but we need to get more people on that platform. I fully agree. And lastly, your point about, at least I resonate a lot with that, is the ESG data meaningful, auditable, and verifiable? I think this is something I think businesses are also struggling. I think we'll make progress, but we would make progress. And as we make the progress, I think rest of the things will come into play, including financing and real green projects get funded, and all those elements will come into play. Thank you so much for your remarks. At this point, let me invite Dr. Piti Sri Sanganam, who is from the ASEAN Studies Center. He's the Director for Academic Affairs. He holds a PhD in economics from University of Melbourne, and he's been teaching international economics and microeconomics, and he's been a Deputy Director for Academic Affairs for Center of European Studies, as well as Deputy Director for Academic Affairs at the ASEAN Studies Center in Chulalongkorn University. And he is focused on ASEAN and economic integration of ASEAN and European Union on economic reforms, SME development in Thailand. Apart from academic work, he also hosts a lot of radio programs on the current issues in ASEAN. And we're all watching eagerly with the various member states grappling with COVID in different degrees. Over to you, Dr. Piti Sri Sanganam.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mukandan. As you introduced me, I'm the university professor who tried to talk to the business community. So to make myself more confident, I rather used the PowerPoint. After the CII gave me the theme of this seminar, I found three keywords. The first one is the word resilience, right? And then the next one is about sustainable. And I think one of the most important keywords is future, right? So I'm going to talk about how to build the, how to build the ASEAN-India resilient economies for a sustainable futures. You know, futures right now, it's so hard to predict, right? Because we are in the VUCA world, right? Volatilities, uncertainties, complexities, and ambiguities, especially we are in the world with the global disorder. We face it with a changing in world order. So this is the environment that we are going to forecast our futures. And then if we can forecast the possible futures, then we know the strategic way in order to achieve the resilient economies. The resilience mean, I think our panelists already talk about the words resilient, like capacity to recover quickly from difficulties. And of course, I'm gonna be blunt. I will critique about this unforeseen future, right? Because the situation in Southeast Asia, the situation in India and in South Asia may differ from other parts of the world. Let me give you the foresight of the possible futures in these regions. So as the economist, when I see the world map, I see the world map as the global value chains. And the global value chain consists normally with three pillars of regional value chains. The first one, of course, the regional value chain in the America continent, USA, Canada, and Mexico. Unfortunately, right now, even America is still the largest economies in terms of GDP, the largest military power in the world, but some political scientists already wrote the book, like Professor Amitav Achaya said, The End of American World Order. And then the second pillars of the global value chain is China. Of course, right now, China is the largest economy in terms of GDP, adjusted for purchasing power parity. This is the largest economies in the world in terms of populations. And recently, we consider China as the new superpower seeking economic opportunities. And of course, the last important pillars of the global value chain is the European Union. European Union may lose its status of hegemon since the end of World War II, but European Union still can establish the international norms and standards, especially the standards on environmental issues, on labor issues, on human rights, on humanitarian assistance. This is the thing that in the heart of European Union. And of course, not only these three pillars, we also, for Southeast Asia and for South Asia, we see Japan. Japan is the important investor who invests in our countries for so long, and it's control the regional value chains. And then we see the Bay of Bengal, India and its neighbor countries. This is the most important emerging economy with a very, very high growth rate. And recently, India just become the third largest economy in the world in terms of GDP adjusted for purchasing power parities. And of course, Thailand is here, a very, very small balloon because our economic size is so small, but it's enlarged by integrated into ASEAN, associations of 10 Southeast Asian nations, 667 million populations. The global value chain was developed very, very well for the past 2-3 decades. And before COVID-19 pandemics, the global value chain reached the highest value of 18 trillion US dollars. And then COVID-19 pandemic occurred. 2020 is not the good year for global value chain because this value of global value chain dropped significantly. And of course, integrated into the global value chain is the main vehicle to drive economic growth, to solve the problems of poverty, and to create jobs. Hence, the crisis from pandemic sent the worst effect to economic conditions. And most of the economists around the world, as well as business people, think the global value chain was declined and reached the bottom already at the midst of the year 2021. So after the third quarter of the year 2021, for the near foreseen futures, we are going to experience the recovery of the global value chains for the year 2021, 2022, and 2023. And most economists around the world believe that by 2023, the value of global value chain will reach the same value before COVID-19 pandemic, 18 trillion US dollars. However, the value may the same, but the structures of this global value chain will change because we are going to see the trade values between US and EU stabilize. We are going to see the declining on trade and investment value between EU and China, but expand with ASEAN. And of course, by US and China, the value of trade will continue to expand with ASEAN, but contracted with China. Hence, ASEAN is the, I can say, locomotive that push and pull the recovery of this global value chain from now on. And of course, because China become the new superpower, the old superpower seems to be unhappy. So we see the US defense ring that try very hard to contain China's sphere of influence. China also try very hard to expand its influence out of this US forward defense rings. US put it, China as the major challenges to their securities, to their economies, to their peace thing since the release of United Nations, US secretary strategies in 2017. And we see a real contentment when the 7th Fleet of the US Navy expand its scope of area from US Pacific Command to US Indo-Pacific Command. Of course, Indo-Pacific Command means Strait of Malacca as well as Bay of Bengal. And this is the, I can say, backyard of India, right? So in 2019, Department of Defense in the US released Indo-Pacific strategies, followed by the COT summit, and recently at G7 meeting, we see the B3W, Build Back Better World projects. So this is the attempts of US that try very hard to contain China. And China keep building that, Belt and Road Initiative since the year 2012. And this is the tangible project that expand the sphere of influence of China. So Bay of Bengal, India, and ASEAN are right middle where the giants clash each other. Not only in terms of power and global disorder, we also see the dynamic disruption from disruptive technologies. We see the change in global value chain. We see the change in logistics. And of course, we see a new normal with most of the countries don't respect the multilateralism anymore. They seem to release their own natures under the excuse of COVID-19. This is the fashion of unilateralism. Hence, the possible futures is so ambiguous because we see what? We see a disruptive technologies. Soon, blockchain will be used more and more. Along with blockchain, we see smart contract, we see digital tokens, we see digital contracts. And of course, with blockchain, we see the utilize of digital currencies as well as cryptocurrencies. In the medium terms, this technology will come. And of course, Chinese and Indian people seems to be the people who are very, very keen, very, very smart in using these technologies. So this is the opportunities for ASEAN, China, and India. And of course, by the next 10, 15 years, all of these digital disruptive will be disrupted again by the coming of the new technologies of quantum 2.0. And right now, China is the quantum advantages, quantum supremacy. And of course, another thing that we may also need to think about the futures of the problem of disruptive technologies is about energies. Our panelists talk a lot about energies. This is the raw material on all goods and services producers around the world. We did talk a lot about localizations. We did talk about prosumer, right? In the near futures, we see a lot of alternative source of energies, as well as the household not only consume energies, but in the opposite way, they can also produce energies because of solar panel, because of windmill and everything. But that's not gonna happen in South Asia and in Southeast Asia, at least by the year 2035. There are so many research work to show that by the year 2035, South Asia and ASEAN still use the main source of energies from fossil fuel. So this is totally different from the scenario drawn by Western countries, by European countries. Hence, we may need to think about this on how we are going to build our business, where the environment, where the rules and regulations of the, European set international norm change in terms of greenhouse effect, in terms of energy consumptions. How do we deal with this? And of course, the global value chain, like I told you, it's recovered from this year, at least to the year 2023, but it comes with the new standards, Industry 4.0. The question is, will our SME, our local producers can upgrade themselves to utilize these new technologies and gain the momentum from the recovery of the GVC? This is another important thing that we have to keep in mind. In terms of logistics, there are so many changes as well because of COVID-19. For example, right now, if you would like to ship one container from Southeast Asia to European or to American markets, the freight cost is increased by 200 up to 300%, 2 times, 3 times before, more expensive compared to before COVID-19. And even you are happy to pay the freight cost, you still cannot export because right now we are run out of container box. In Thailand, in Singapore, in Southeast Asia right now, we even have to, import the empty container box back from Europe and pay the freight cost for this empty container because we don't have container. Hence, the disruption in logistics did occur. We are also talking about the South China Sea disputes. There are some forecasts that by the next 7 up to 10 years, it's easily to have, accident in South China Sea. And if this accident occur, it may lead to a war. And there is a lot of economists, paper published by economists in the US to do the model and forecast that if the trade route in South China Sea is not work, the 5 countries that support the most will be Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, Vietnam, and number 5, Thailand. 3 of them located in ASEAN. 3 of them located next to Strait of Malacca and South China Sea. Hence, sea freight also faced with the problems. Hence, we may have to think about what's going to happen with big port cities in India, in South Asia. What's going to happen with Mumbai, Chennai, Kolkata? What's going to happen to Colombo, Chittagong? This is the thing that we may have to keep in mind. And of course, Belt and Road initiatives by China. The railway connectivities are there already. On the 2nd of December this year, the railway that connect Vientiane, the capital cities of Laos, PDR, in the middle of mainland ASEAN, will be grand opening. And you can transport one container truck, one container box from Southeast Asia, via this railway through China to any point in Europe within only 18 up to 22 days. This is half a time using maritime connectivities. And the freight cost is about the same price as now because the sea freight is go up twice or sometimes triples. The question is how to build an economic corridor or special economic zone to link these opportunities together in our home countries, in India, in Thailand, in South Asia, in the Bay of Bengal, in ASEAN communities. This is another challenge. And of course, last but not least, we see a new normal of climate crisis. And I don't want to say that right now, so many countries need to do a tax reform. Because what? Because they spend so much quantitative easing during subprime crisis. And after subprime crisis, they create a huge debt in order to do economic stimulus package. Hence, after COVID pandemic, this is the time to repay that debt. So all governments around the world will expand their tax base, will create the new idea about how to collect tax, especially on tariff. Since most favored nation rate or under WTO is very, very low, especially among the group of developed economies. So I don't want to see the countries like European countries or America use climate change as an excuse to create trade barriers. And we are going to face one, right? Because European Union is about to release a new tax on carbon content of imports. So in the near future, by 2023 and full implemented in the year 2025, all imports into European countries will no longer subject to percentage out of the value imports. But you have to pay full price for greenhouse effect gas emissions. I don't want the developed economy to shift all this burden of protecting environments from developed economies to least developed economies. Because this is, opposite to what we talk in UNFCCC. This is opposite to what we agree in Paris Agreement on climate change. And of course, this is not follow any WTO rules and regulations. So it's a fashion of unilateralism. And the major problem is all of these problems interdependence and interlinkages together. So how to create a sustainable futures, how to create a resilient economies between ASEAN and India. That's the most important questions right now. Under the world with the global disorder, with the volatilities, uncertainties, complexities, and ambiguities. And of course, there's the wise words. This is very, very classic quotes. The best way to predict the futures is to invent it. So how come ASEAN and India invent these futures, the bright future for us? How come ASEAN and the Bay of Bengal countries can utilize our strategic locations in order to balance the clash of power between China, European, and US? That's the important thing. And of course, I recommend 3 reforms. This is the solutions I propose to create a sustainable futures. The 3 reforms, of course, come from 3 aspects: peopleware, hardware, and software. Start from peopleware. We may need to adjust our foreign policy to focus more on preserving regional interest by balancing superpower. And of course, sometimes this may create some conflicts with the individual national interest. But if all countries around the world, especially the group of emerging economy like us, least developed and developing economy like us, always think only about our individual national interest, we don't have any bargaining power. Hence, in order to balance the power, we need to think more about the regional interest, ASEAN and India, as well as the Bay of Bengal, how to join our hand to do this job. And of course, in terms of human resources, to cope up with the uncertainties futures, we need to develop our human resources, at least in 3 dimensions. Digital literacies, which India is champion right now. We see IIT, right? Indian Institute of Technologies, the top university of the world. On trade and financial literacies. Of course, most of the accountants around the world in so many countries are Indian origins, right? So they are so keen with number. And last but not least, complex problem solving for the 21st centuries. This is the skill that need the most. How to join our hand and create people-to-people connectivities to build a capacity building between ASEAN and India to achieve this goal. For the hardware, of course, infrastructure development, we may have to focus on the advanced and future technologies. How ASEAN and India work together on develop quantum technologies. Because right now we are almost hit the ceiling of digital age, right? We are talking about the next 15, 20 years where digital was disrupted again by quantum technologies. So we better join our hand, create this infrastructure and develop quantum technology together, as well as, of course, develop the logistic infrastructure so that Southeast and South Asian regions can connect with each other as well as other regions. We did talk a lot for a very long time about trilateral highway, India, Myanmar, Thailand. But for now, we still don't see any progress, and it cannot be done on that timeline. We need ASEAN BIMSTEC centralities, and without interference from external power. This is very, very important. You know, in ASEAN, we released the so-called ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific in the year 2019 when Thailand hosts ASEAN Summit. And after that, when China would like to create its Belt and Road initiatives that connect to Southeast Asia, it has to follow ASEAN connectivities, master plan on ASEAN connectivities. We ensure our ASEAN centralities. After China, we see the agreement between ASEAN and Japan that Japan will build the infrastructures concordant with master plan on ASEAN connectivities, followed by ASEAN plus 3, Japan, China, Korea, and then even right now, World Bank endorsed master plan on ASEAN connectivities. So how to make this build back better world proposed by the US to the leaders of G7 to be concordant with what is our major plan to ensure our centralities on this, you know, uncertain Indo-Pacific theater. Unfortunately, by far, I still cannot see BIMSTEC or SAARC outlook on the Indo-Pacific yet. So we may need to see this kind of thing. And for software, we need to accelerate the progress of free trade agreements, negotiations and implementations. The rules of origins are the highest priority. So will it be possible for India to rejoin Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which is the largest FTA in the world, to ensure that the regional value chain in Asia can keep running without any barriers? How to upgrade BIMSTEC to fully implement its FTA, as well as ASEAN-India FTA, in order to help each other to integrate and gain the momentum of this recover global value chains. And last but not least, we need to reform the framework of corporations among member countries. You know, it's useless if you have so many broad corporations field of corporations, but you cannot utilize it. So we may need to rethink about it, especially under these new normal situations after COVID-19 pandemic, in order to, of course, building a resilient economies for a sustainable futures for ASEAN and India. Thank you very much.
Thank you for those good presentation and very incisive remarks. We've terribly ran out of time, and I think I just want to apologize to all the panelists for this. If I may seek their indulgence for another 5 minutes to 7 minutes, we should hear from Arunaba. Arunaba has been one of the key thinkers from India in terms of the whole sustainability, energy transition, as a founder, CEO of Council of Energy, Environment and Water. And he's amongst the key advisors to various policymakers, including India's Prime Minister's PMO itself. Arunaba, with that brief introduction, over to you. And sorry for the delay on this one. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mukundan, and many thanks to CII and to the Ministry of External Affairs for inviting me to this. I see many friends on this panel as well, and I've learned a lot in this discussion. I realize we're well over time, so let me dive straight in. I'll cut short most of what I wanted to say. And I'm going to pick up from what Professor Sri Sanganam talked about at one stage. It's something that I parrot out to my colleagues often. The only way to predict the future is to shape it. But my vision is slightly different, which is that while we should be entirely cognizant of an evolving geopolitics, we should also be thinking about how that integration and that resilience that we've all been wrestling with can go beyond these blocks that we are getting, you know, whether it's the US on one side, EU on the other side, China, or then ASEAN, India. So I'm going to just talk about 3 big themes in maybe 5 minutes. First, resilience against what and for whom. A lot of you on the panel have already talked about the pandemic, you've talked about climate shocks. Here's the problem that we have. We don't have resilience against the perfect storm of shocks. So we've had a pandemic, and we have an unfolding climate crisis, and we could also have a food crisis. Siberian farmers, one of the largest exporters in the world, are about to lose their crop this year. So guess where the food price index is going to go in the importing countries? We will likely have water stress. So it's this resilience against a perfect storm of shocks that we don't have. So here's my one vision for a renewed multilateralism. I call it multilateralism against chronic risks. The pandemic is an acute risk. It happens once a century, okay? But climate crisis and this perfect storm of shocks, this is going to keep unfolding. Now, what do we do about this? Currently, we don't have any kind of an insurance cushion for the world's vulnerable, whether it's countries or communities, against these kind of unfolding chronic risks. For the first time, only the fourth time ever, the IMF is going to come out with its additional allocation of special drawing rights. Now, this does not require any additional public money. So can a certain proportion of the $650 billion of SDRs be put towards what I call a global risk pooling reserve fund? It basically releases out this money when these perfect storms of shocks, indexed by whatever metric you want to take, unfold. Otherwise, what we'll have is that Wimbledon, a tennis tournament, will get more from its pandemic insurance than all of the world's low-income countries together. $142 million in insurance on one side and $131 million on the other side. So can we then create a global risk pooling reserve fund without requiring new public money, but that creates that insurance mechanism? Equally, resilience for whom? And many of you have talked about the MSME sector, the small businesses. Let me not repeat. Let me highlight one more dimension we've not talked about, which is the rural economy, not just in India, but Sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, and elsewhere. Now, how do we, again, rebuild this rural economy, which is resilient to these unfolding shocks, and yet taps evolving technologies? We have estimated that in India alone, using distributed energy for technologies that exist to power up enterprises, not just light up a home, in the rural sector is a $53 billion opportunity. In Sub-Saharan Africa, there's a $12 billion opportunity. Now, this is for the bottom of the pyramid, which is not getting tapped. And yet it could create millions of jobs, create new entrepreneurs and micro entrepreneurs, and create a resilience in those communities that are now having to deal with an influx of migrants back from the cities. So that's really my vision about resilience against what and resilience for whom. So let me spend a couple of minutes on sustainability of what kind within India and with other countries. Now, in the 2010s, the sustainability was primarily about renewable and energy efficiency. In the 2020s, we have a renewables ramp up, looking at 450 gigawatts of renewables by 2030. We have a huge push towards electric mobility. That alone is, in our estimation, a $200 billion plus market. We're also the first country that action plan, and Ambassador Pacheco also talked about what Colombia is doing on low global warming refrigerants. But I see the real opportunity in the sustainability agenda of the 2030s and the 2040s, but for which we have to start now. And that's where the disruptive technologies, whether it's green hydrogen on one hand, whether it's long distance freight on road or on rail comes in, or whether it's sustainable agriculture to bring in the nature-based solutions for agroforestry, soil carbon retention, more climate resilient crops, more water efficient agriculture, and yet greater food security. Now, none of this is, we don't have a multilateral agenda for sustainability. It's not technology mercantilism. Between the failed Copenhagen Climate Summit and the successful Paris Climate Summit,
11% of new WTO disputes related to clean energy. But clean energy doesn't account for 11% of global trade. So we are planting these mercantilist flags and trade barriers even before the sectors have gained the kind of critical mass that is needed for people and the planet. So what is needed, and I'll conclude there, is a deal for development. We need a deal that actually looks not at sustainability in the margins, but sustainability at the mainstream of how we rethink our economic progress. And that deal for development will then tap into the global supply chains and value chains that Professor Sri Sanganam was talked about. But it will to do this not the old school way, they extract lithium from Bolivia, but make batteries somewhere else. There has to be an increase in the value addition in a much larger set of countries. So we don't have that technology mercantilism in the name of the planet. Only if we did that will we be able to convert people on the planet and get the political support for sustainability and resilience that is currently missing en masse. So I've taken up my 5 minutes. Let me stop there. Thank you again.
Thank you, Arunabha. Wonderful finish to a great start, which we had with Her Excellency Pacheco starting off this entire discussion. I think we've gone through a swath of issues covering from ASEAN, Europe, and South America, and a set of perspectives which are very rich and enriching. I'm not going to even attempt to put it all together. I've taken copious notes. We will put it together, and I'm sure this will form a framework with which we can start to think about various dimensions. I can only thank all of you for your wonderful exposition of various strands of this whole thing of resilience and sustainability and how we can bring back together. But I think it all ended with one statement, which I'm going to steal from Arunabha, which is we need a multilateral deal for development going forward. I think that seems to be one of the core issues as we build back better for future. So let me thank all of you. And if there are individual questions, we'll reach out to you all, and then maybe we'll respond to the questions directly through the Secretariat of CII. And let me also thank CII for organizing the session and all the participants for being patient and indulgent through this whole session. Thank you once again.
Thank you everyone. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. สวัสดีครับ
Thank you very much. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.